Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you to challenge a word that is often celebrated but rarely understood: tolerance. On the surface, tolerance appears noble, even virtuous. We hear it in classrooms, on political stages, and across the media. We must pause for a moment and look beneath this glittering surface. I say this with purpose. Tolerance is an ugly word. Why ugly? Because tolerance implies enduring something unpleasant. You tolerate a headache, you tolerate noise or pain or inconvenience. So when we say we tolerate people of different backgrounds, religions, cultures, or views, what are we really saying? That their existence is a discomfort we are willing to endure? That they are a burden we are noble enough to carry? That's not respect. That's condescension. The word tolerance may sound virtuous in everyday language, but when dissected, it reveals a deeper, more unsettling meaning. At its core, the act of tolerating something suggests that it is not fully accepted or embraced. It is simply endured. Just as one might tolerate a loud noise or a bitter taste, tolerating a person or a belief inherently carries a sense of reluctance or discomfort. This nuance often goes unnoticed, yet it plays a powerful role in shaping how we relate to one another. In many ways, to say we tolerate someone is to admit we find them undesirable or disruptive, yet feel obligated to endure their presence. When people from different cultures, religions, or lifestyles are told they are being tolerated, what message are we really sending them? It is not a message of equality or mutual appreciation. Instead, it subtly communicates that they are on the margins, that their existence is something to be put up with, not something to be celebrated or respected. Tolerance in this context becomes a polite rejection rather than a bridge to understanding. It reinforces an invisible hierarchy, where those doing the tolerating maintain a position of power, while those being tolerated are seen as somehow lesser, different, or problematic. This interpretation of tolerance becomes especially troubling in diverse societies, where harmony depends not just on coexistence but on connection and shared dignity. If people feel that they are merely being tolerated, it cultivates resentment and emotional distance. They may feel like guests in a space where they should feel at home. Tolerance then can create walls instead of tearing them down. It is a passive, surface-level gesture that avoids addressing deeper biases, misunderstandings, or structural inequalities. Respect, by contrast, involves active engagement, a desire to learn, and the recognition of another's inherent worth. Moreover, the idea of tolerance often allows people to pat themselves on the back for doing the bare minimum. In many social and institutional settings, tolerance has become a buzzword, a substitute for genuine inclusion. Schools teach children to tolerate differences rather than to appreciate them. Workplaces encourage tolerance to avoid conflict, not to foster authentic collaboration. This creates a culture where people can claim moral superiority without actually confronting their prejudices. It allows them to feel enlightened while still maintaining emotional and cultural distance from those who are different. Another problem is that tolerance can easily mask underlying hostility. A person may tolerate someone they secretly dislike, disapprove of, or even fear. This kind of silent tension can be more damaging than open conflict because it is harder to detect and address. When hostility hides behind a mask of politeness, it prevents any opportunity for healing, dialogue, or growth. People are not blind to these subtle cues. They know when they are being merely tolerated. The absence of hostility does not equal the presence of acceptance. And the emotional toll of being barely welcomed is profound. Ultimately, tolerance sets a low standard for human interaction. It encourages us to suppress our discomfort rather than confront its roots. It discourages inquiry, challenges, and meaningful conversations in favor of an artificial peace. While it may seem like a step towards social harmony, tolerance often stops short of real progress. True respect requires us to go beyond endurance and toward recognition, empathy, and connection. Without that, we risk maintaining a fragile coexistence built on silence and discomfort rather than on shared humanity. In the pursuit of social harmony and peaceful coexistence, many societies have promoted the idea of tolerance as a guiding principle. While tolerance may seem like a progressive value, it falls short when compared to the deeper, more transformative power of acceptance. Tolerance allows for the presence of difference without necessarily welcoming it, whereas acceptance requires us to recognize, affirm, and value that difference. The distinction between the two may appear subtle on the surface, but in practice, it creates vastly different social environments. Unity built on tolerance is fragile, often cosmetic. Unity founded on acceptance is durable and sincere. To understand this more clearly, consider how tolerance and acceptance play out in daily human interactions. If someone tolerates your beliefs, they allow you to speak, but they may roll their eyes, avoid further discussion, or maintain emotional distance. They might not challenge you directly, but they also don't engage meaningfully. On the other hand, someone who accepts your beliefs seeks to understand where you're coming from. They ask questions. They listen without judgment. And even if they disagree, they validate your right to feel and think the way you do. This engagement is what builds true relationships. Tolerance keeps people in separate corners of a shared space. It permits diversity to exist, but does little to connect those differences. People might live side by side in the same neighborhood, work in the same office, or attend the same school, yet still remain strangers. They may never exchange stories, never break bread together, never move beyond polite detachment. Acceptance, by contrast, it encourages people to cross over cultural, social, and ideological divides. Quote on us to open our culture, connection, rather than action, skill, spiritual, discussion, pression, kash, any, aram. In the context of national unity or community development, the difference between tolerance and acceptance becomes even more critical. A country that merely tolerates its minorities creates a climate of tension and exclusion. There may be laws that protect rights on paper, but without a culture of acceptance, those rights can feel hollow. Acceptance, however, fosters a sense of belonging. It encourages institutions, media, and individuals to celebrate diversity as a source of strength, not as a problem to be managed. It transforms policies into practices. Furthermore, Tolerance can unintentionally create social stagnation when people believe they've already done their duty by tolerating others. They may resist further efforts to understand or uplift marginalized voices. They may feel that any additional effort is unnecessary or even burdensome. Acceptance, however, demands continuous learning and growth. It asks people to examine their own biases, to be open to uncomfortable truths, and to evolve in their understanding of what equity and inclusion really mean. This is not easy, but it is essential for genuine unity that goes beyond appearances. Ultimately, a society that rests on tolerance alone is a society held together by politeness, not by trust. It may avoid open conflict, but it lacks the warmth, depth, and richness that acceptance brings. Acceptance is not just about coexisting, it's about embracing, about weaving the unique threads of every individual into the shared fabric of community. Without it, unity remains a slogan. With it, unity becomes a lived, felt, and enduring experience. Tolerance is often presented as a peaceful virtue, a way of managing diversity without conflict. But when we analyze it more closely, we find that tolerance is, at its core, a passive stance. It requires minimal effort and minimal interaction. To tolerate someone is to allow them to exist near you without trying to understand who they are or what they believe. It does not demand engagement or emotional investment. Instead, it creates a kind of emotional distance where one can avoid outright discrimination while still maintaining indifference. This passive nature is what makes tolerance insufficient for addressing the deeper divisions and misunderstandings that exist within society. Empathy, on the other hand, is anything but passive. It requires a deliberate choice to place oneself in another person's position, to imagine their experiences, and to feel their emotions. Where tolerance says, I'll put up with you, empathy says, I want to understand you. Empathy demands vulnerability and humility. It forces us to confront our own assumptions and listen without defensiveness. This active engagement fosters a much deeper connection between people than tolerance ever can. It's the difference between avoiding harm and actually seeking the good of another. Understanding takes the work of empathy even further by involving intellectual curiosity and intentional learning. To understand someone means taking the time to learn their history, their struggles, their values, and their point of view. It is not enough to passively coexist with others. We must strive to know them. Tolerance allows for ignorance to remain intact. Understanding challenges that ignorance and replaces it with informed compassion. This process leads to meaningful dialogue, the breakdown of harmful stereotypes, and the formation of genuine human bonds that transcend superficial differences. In personal relationships, this distinction becomes very clear. Imagine being in a friendship or marriage where the other person only tolerates you. That relationship would feel cold, transactional, and emotionally distant. Now, imagine a relationship based on empathy and understanding. One where your thoughts and feelings are not only acknowledged, but actively explored and valued. That relationship would be one of warmth, safety, and mutual growth. The same is true at a societal level. A tolerant society might function without open hostility, but only an empathetic and understanding society can flourish through shared connection. Moreover, relying on tolerance alone often becomes a way to avoid discomfort. It is easier to say I tolerate your beliefs than to admit I don't understand them, but I'd like to. Empathy and understanding take emotional energy. They challenge the ego. They disrupt mental routines. But it is in this disruption that transformation happens. When we stretch ourselves to see the world through another's eyes, we expand our humanity. Tolerance offers safety. Empathy offers growth. Tolerance avoids pain. Understanding moves through it to find truth. In education, leadership, and community building, the importance of moving from tolerance to empathy and understanding cannot be overstated. Teachers who tolerate disruptive students may maintain order, but teachers who understand their students change lives. Leaders who tolerate differing voices may prevent chaos, but leaders who seek to empathize inspire unity. Communities that only tolerate diversity remain divided, but those that seek to understand one another create authentic cohesion. Tolerance may keep the peace, but empathy and understanding build something far more powerful, real, lasting, human connection. While tolerance is often viewed as a virtue, it can easily become a mask, one that hides deeper, more troubling emotions, such as indifference or even quiet contempt. On the surface, someone may appear tolerant by avoiding conflict or refraining from overt prejudice. But beneath that surface, there may be a lack of genuine care, interest, or concern for others. Tolerance, in this sense, becomes a socially acceptable shield, allowing people to keep their distance while appearing morally upright. It's let people say, I am not against you, while quietly refusing to stand with you or support your struggles. This superficial civility prevents deeper engagement and transformation. The problem with this form of tolerance is that it enables people to opt out of meaningful interaction with those who are different from them. They may feel no need to challenge their own perspectives, learn about others' lives, or take action in the face of injustice. After all, if they are being tolerant, they believe they've done enough. This mindset creates a dangerous illusion of progress. It convinces individuals and societies that simply not being openly hostile is equivalent to doing good. But passivity in the face of inequality is not neutral, it is part of the problem. When tolerance becomes a substitute for empathy and action, it enables the status quo to continue unchecked. Indifference, cloaked in tolerance, is particularly harmful in diverse societies where inclusion and equity are essential. People from marginalized communities may face discrimination, cultural erasure, or systemic exclusion, and in those moments, they don't need to be merely tolerated. They need to be defended, valued, and heard. Yet when tolerance is used as a shield, it allows those in power to remain uninvolved. It becomes a tool for avoiding the discomfort of real dialogue and for evading the responsibilities that come with privilege. In this way, tolerance can perpetuate silence in the face of suffering, wrapped in the language of politeness. This shield of indifference is reinforced by institutions as well. Schools, workplaces, and governments may adopt tolerance policies that look good on paper but fail to address the underlying biases and injustices that persist within their structures. These institutions often focus on avoiding liability rather than promoting genuine inclusion. The language of tolerance is used to satisfy public expectations, but rarely does it lead to initiatives that transform hearts and minds. It offers a minimalist approach, just enough to avoid criticism, not enough to create lasting change. And this minimalism breeds complacency. When people are indifferent but pretend to be tolerant, they also miss opportunities for personal growth. They remain locked in narrow worldviews, never challenged by the richness of perspectives and experiences around them. They may pride themselves on their neutrality, unaware that this neutrality isolates them from connection and wisdom. Tolerance, when misused, not only harms those being tolerated, but also stunts the moral and emotional development of those who hide behind it. Indifference may protect comfort, but it robs us of the deeper fulfillment that comes from real human connection. Ultimately, when tolerance serves as a shield for indifference, it fails to meet the needs of both individuals and society. It is an empty performance that soothes the conscience without demanding compassion. It offers no support to the voiceless, no recognition to the unseen, and no justice to the oppressed. Tolerance in this form is not love. It is avoidance. It is hesitation. And it is not a foundation for unity. It is a wall that prevents us from ever truly seeing each other. At first glance, a tolerant society may seem inclusive, progressive, and peaceful. It gives the appearance of allowing all voices, all beliefs, and all identities to coexist. But this image can be deeply misleading. Tolerance, when used as the main framework for social interaction, often masks subtle forms of exclusion. It creates the illusion of openness while leaving in place unspoken hierarchies and power dynamics. In a tolerant society, people are allowed to exist, but they are not necessarily welcomed, supported, or celebrated. They are often invited into spaces where the rules were not made for them, where their presence is accepted only as long as it does not disrupt the dominant culture. This hidden exclusion is particularly felt by marginalized communities, ethnic minorities, religious groups, LGBTQ+ individuals, and others whose identities have historically been sidelined. These individuals are often told they are included, but the terms of that inclusion are conditional. They must assimilate, adapt, or remain quiet to be considered acceptable. Their cultures may be exoticized but not respected. Their voices acknowledged but not heard. They are expected to be grateful for being tolerated, as if mere permission to exist is a gift. This is not true inclusion. It is containment, wrapped in the language of civility. In many tolerant societies, policies and statements are carefully worded to project fairness without committing to structural change. Schools may have multicultural events, workplaces may have diversity slogans, and governments may publish statements of equality. But if these efforts are not supported by equitable practices, real representation, and power sharing, then they remain symbolic. The core systems still function in a way that privileges one group over others. This kind of shallow inclusion does not challenge the roots of exclusion. It simply repackages inequality in more socially acceptable terms. It soothes guilt rather than confronting injustice. Social interactions in a tolerant society can also reinforce exclusion through microaggressions and subtle barriers. People may be polite but dismissive, curious but condescending. A person may be invited to the table but not given a voice. They may be seen but not truly understood. Tolerance allows these dynamics to flourish because it does not demand deep reflection or genuine empathy. It sets the standard for behavior at a level that prioritizes comfort over justice and appearance over authenticity. As long as overt hostility is avoided, the society believes it is doing well, even as many of its members continue to feel invisible. True inclusion requires more than the passive acceptance that tolerance offers. It demands intentional listening, meaningful participation, and redistribution of power. It asks us not only to open the door, but to make sure the space behind it is safe, accessible, and affirming. In contrast, tolerance often keeps people at the margins, even while claiming to be inclusive. It emphasizes coexistence without connection, permission without partnership. And so, despite the rhetoric of openness, many still feel that they are living on the outside, barely acknowledged by the society. They are asked to trust. The danger of relying solely on tolerance is that it creates a false sense of accomplishment. People begin to believe that because outright hatred is no longer visible, inclusion has been achieved. But exclusion does not always wear the face of hostility. Often, it looks like politeness with cold eyes, like space that feels occupied but not shared. In this way, a tolerant society can actually deepen feelings of alienation by pretending that equity exists when it doesn't. It places the burden of gratitude on those who are tolerated and allows those who are already done enough. And it indicates contempt for the rest of humanity. It is so harsh to get beneath the fire. Tolerance is often considered a stepping stone toward peace and coexistence. But when it becomes the final destination, it severely limits the scope of social progress. While it may reduce overt conflict, it does not foster growth, innovation, or deep societal change. It encourages people to stop at the first sign of harmony, rather than continuing the journey toward equity, justice, and understanding. By settling for tolerance, individuals and institutions alike risk becoming stagnant, resistant to change, and unwilling to examine the deeper roots of inequality, bias, or division. Tolerance then can become a kind of intellectual laziness, where surface-level peace is mistaken for genuine transformation. A society that prides itself on tolerance may congratulate itself for not being openly hateful or discriminatory. But this attitude fosters complacency, where people assume that simply not being hostile is enough. They may avoid offensive language and embrace multicultural holidays, but refuse to examine how power is distributed, how voices are silenced, or how historical wounds remain unhealed. In this way, tolerance lowers the bar for what is considered moral or just. It asks only for quiet coexistence, not for active fairness or inclusion. As a result, the deeper problems like systemic racism, gender inequality, or cultural erasure remain untouched beneath the polite exterior. Tolerance also discourages critical dialogue. When people are focused only on putting up with difference, they avoid the uncomfortable conversations that could lead to mutual growth. They may feel that engaging too deeply with opposing viewpoints threatens their own beliefs, or worse, opens emotional wounds they would rather ignore. But meaningful progress requires discomfort. It requires stepping outside of comfort zones, challenging old paradigms, and confronting painful truths. Tolerance, by contrast, offers a way to sidestep these difficult but necessary experiences. It silences the very friction that can spark enlightenment and social evolution. This tendency to avoid challenge also plays out in leadership and policy making. Leaders who settle for a tolerant society may implement just enough diversity initiatives to appear inclusive, but not enough to disrupt the structures of power that maintain inequality. They may talk about representation but fail to support equitable access or meaningful change. Tolerance becomes a tool for image management rather than a catalyst for progress. It allows those in authority to appease criticism without engaging in the deep, uncomfortable labor of creating real equity. This stunts democratic growth and weakens civic participation by reducing inclusion to a shallow performance. In education too, the limitations of tolerance become clear. Schools that teach children merely to tolerate others miss an opportunity to cultivate empathy, cultural competence, and moral courage. Students may grow up learning that difference is something to be endured, not embraced. They may avoid bullying but still fail to build genuine friendships with those who are different from them. Tolerance in education sets the emotional tone to one of distance rather than connection. Without deliberate efforts to go beyond tolerance, the next generation may inherit the same unspoken prejudices and fears, masked by politeness but rooted in ignorance. Ultimately, when societies, leaders, and individuals view tolerance as the end point of progress, they place a ceiling on what humanity can achieve together. Tolerance may prevent immediate conflict, but it does not inspire collective vision or shared purpose. It creates a static peace rather than a dynamic unity. It permits injustice to remain unexamined under the assumption that mere coexistence is sufficient. True progress comes from engagement, reflection, dialogue, and transformation, not from endurance alone. Tolerance may be the first step on the ladder, but if we stop climbing, we will never reach the heights of justice, equality, or deep human connection. Humanity is a concept far deeper than simply existing side by side. It is rooted in connection, compassion, and the desire to understand and uplift one another. While tolerance may allow us to avoid confrontation, it does not push us to develop the emotional depth needed to truly live in harmony. Tolerance says, you stay in your space, I'll stay in mine. But humanity says, let's build a space together. To embrace our shared humanity, we must be willing to go beyond the minimum, beyond tolerating differences, to actively reaching out, engaging, and valuing each other's experiences. That level of commitment requires more than patience. It requires emotional bravery. One of the pillars of this deeper approach is love. Not romantic love, but the love that comes from recognizing the inherent worth of another person simply because they are human. Love breaks barriers that tolerance cannot. It invites us to care not just about people like us, but about those who challenge us, who believe differently, who look or speak or think in unfamiliar ways. Where tolerance permits distance, love seeks closeness. Love motivates us to protect the rights of others, to speak up when they are threatened, and to celebrate their joys as if they were our own. Without love, our coexistence lacks sincerity and warmth. Alongside love stands the necessity of dialogue. True understanding can never occur in silence. Tolerance often promotes a quiet, surface-level peace that discourages tough conversations in the name of social comfort. But meaningful dialogue is where empathy is born. It's in open conversations, especially the hard ones, that we discover our shared fears, hopes, and values. Dialogue allows us to challenge stereotypes, correct misinformation, and dismantle prejudice, not through confrontation, but through storytelling and listening. It turns walls into windows and bridges gaps that silence can only widen. However, engaging in real dialogue and choosing love over apathy is not always easy. That's why courage is the final essential ingredient. Courage is what pushes us to listen to unfamiliar perspectives, to unlearn what we were taught, to confront injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. It takes courage to question our own biases, to defend those who are vulnerable, and to admit when we've been wrong. Tolerance asks nothing of us. Courage, on the other hand, demands everything. Our awareness, our humility, and our willingness to grow. It's not always pleasant, but it is always powerful. Moreover, a truly human society doesn't avoid complexity. It embraces it. People are not one-dimensional, and their identities cannot be tolerated in fragments. They must be understood and accepted in full, in all their depth and contradiction. Love, dialogue, and courage equip us to navigate that complexity with compassion and strength. They help us see that real unity is not about sameness. It's about valuing difference as a source of learning and connection. This approach doesn't just create a more just society, it cultivates wisdom, resilience, and a sense of global belonging. In the end, while tolerance may offer a quiet street, love, dialogue, and courage offer a vibrant, thriving neighborhood. They create not only peaceful coexistence, but purposeful community. Humanity demands that we see each other not as inconveniences to be endured, but as individuals to be cherished, heard, and stood beside. These qualities elevate our shared lives into something more meaningful, where diversity is not a burden, but a gift, and where relationships are not polite facades, but real transformative bonds. So let us not settle for the colder comfort of tolerance, a word that permits presence but denies full participation. Let us aim higher. Let us choose empathy over avoidance, dialogue over silence, love over apathy, and courage over complacency. Because only when we go beyond tolerating one another and begin truly embracing one another, can we build a world where every human being feels seen, heard, valued, and free. In this world, tolerance will no longer be needed, not because difference has disappeared, but because it is finally respected, accepted, and celebrated.